You believe the cash in your pocket is safe. It's the one thing that can't collapse, right? Now picture this. In November 1923, in Germany, one single US dollar was worth 4.2 trillion German marks. People burned banknotes in their stoves because paper money was cheaper than firewood. A lifetime of savings that bought a house in 1919 couldn't buy a loaf of bread 4 years later. By the end of this, you'll see exactly how ordinary money becomes garbage, and the warning signs that show up first. None of this is financial advice, by the way. I'm just going to walk you through how the numbers actually broke, so you can spot the pattern yourself. Let me take you to a factory gate in Berlin at noon. A crowd of women waits outside the iron fence. When the whistle blows, their husbands rush out and hand over the morning's wages, not in a wallet, but in a suitcase, in a laundry basket, in a wheelbarrow. The women then actually run to the shops, because by the afternoon, those same bricks of cash will buy half as much. Workers were being paid twice a day just to keep up. This is hyperinflation, and I want to be clear about what that word means, because it's not the mild inflation you hear about on the news. Normal inflation is prices creeping up a few percent a year. Hyperinflation is prices doubling in days, then in hours. It's money dying in real time, in your hand, while you hold it. Let me give you a face for this. Meet Clara. She's 52, a widow living in Frankfurt. Her husband died before the war and left her something precious for the time, 40,000 marks in a savings account. In 1913, that was a comfortable cushion, enough to live on modestly for the rest of her life without ever working again. Clara did everything right. She saved. She was careful. Hold on to Clara, because what happens to her 40,000 marks is the whole story. By 1923, people were using stacks of cash as building blocks for their kids. They wallpapered rooms with banknotes because wallpaper cost more than the money. Shopkeepers stopped counting bills and started weighing them on scales. Think about that. Your money was worth more by weight as paper than as currency. The number printed on it had become a joke. So how does a serious industrial nation, the country of Bach and Beethoven and world-class engineering, end up here? To understand it, we have to rewind almost 10 years to a decision made in 1914. When Germany marched into World War I, its leaders faced a simple question. How do you pay for a war? You have two options. You can raise taxes and make people pay now, or you can borrow and promise to pay later. Germany chose to borrow, almost entirely. And here's the gamble underneath that choice. They were betting on winning. The plan was brutal but logical to them at the time. Win the war, then force the defeated countries to repay everything. The losers would foot the bill. So why tax your own citizens when you can send the invoice to your enemies? At the same time, in 1914, Germany quietly cut the cord that tied its currency to gold. Here's what that gold link actually meant in plain terms. For centuries, paper money was really just a claim ticket. You could, in theory, march into a bank and swap your note for real gold. That link was the leash. It stopped governments from printing endless paper because every note had to be backed by something solid in a vault. In 1914, Germany dropped the leash. Then the unthinkable happened. Germany lost. The whole financial plan had rested on victory, and victory never came. By 1918, when the war ended, Germany was buried under a national debt of 156 billion marks, and there were no defeated enemies to send the bill to. The invoice was still there. It just had Germany's own name on it now. And then it got heavier. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles didn't just end the war. It handed Germany the tab for the whole thing. In May 1921, the winners spelled out the terms in something called the London Schedule of Payments. It added roughly 50 billion marks in reparations, money Germany had to pay the victors, in cash and in raw goods like coal and timber. Now think about the corner Germany was in. It owed staggering sums it could not possibly cover. Tax revenue wasn't close to enough. So the government kept doing the one thing that felt easy in the moment. It printed more paper money to cover the gap. Every deficit, every shortfall was patched with freshly printed marks. Here's where a quiet villain steps in, and it's not a person, it's an institution. In August 1921, the German central bank, the Reichsbank, started buying up hard foreign currency using paper marks. at basically any price. They claimed it was to fund reparations. In practice, they were dumping their own currency onto the market by the truckload. When you flood the world with something, its price falls. That's true for coffee, for oil, and for money. And fall it did. Watch the slide. In 1914, a dollar bought you around 4 marks. By December 1922, $1 cost 8,000 marks. Let that sink in. The currency had already lost almost all its value, and the truly insane part hadn't even started yet. Clara's 40,000 marks, that comfortable cushion, was now worth about $5. Here's a question worth pausing on. If you were a German saver in 1922, watching prices climb, what would you have done? Most people did the natural, careful thing. They held on, waited for it to settle, trusted that the money would recover. That instinct, the instinct to trust your cash, is exactly what destroyed them. Because in January 1923, the situation went from a crisis to a catastrophe. Germany fell behind on its reparations deliveries. So France and Belgium sent troops and occupied the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, the region that made its steel and mined its coal. The engine room of the entire economy was now under foreign boots. The German government's response is the exact moment the fuse was lit. It called for passive resistance. Translation: workers in the Ruhr went on strike and refused to produce anything for the occupiers. A noble idea, but the government promised to pay those striking workers wages anyway, and to compensate the businesses that made nothing. With what money? Money that didn't exist yet, so they printed it. Sit with the trap here. The country's factories had stopped producing real goods, but the government was pumping out more and more cash to pay people who were making nothing. More money, fewer goods. That is the pure recipe for inflation, distilled to its rawest form. And they poured it straight down the nation's throat. The printing became physically absurd. By mid-1923, the government had outsourced the job to 133 private printing companies, presses running around the clock, day and night, just to keep enough paper in circulation. They couldn't print zeros fast enough. Notes were being overprinted with bigger numbers before the ink was dry. Now here is the paradigm shift. The thing everyone believed was that money had value because of the number printed on it. That was the illusion. Money never had value because of the paper, or the ink, or the number. Money had value because people trusted it. Trust that tomorrow it would still buy bread. Trust that the person across the counter would take it. The instant that trust cracked, the paper became what it always physically was, a worthless rectangle. The government thought it was printing money. What it was really printing was proof that the money meant nothing. And once trust snaps, it accelerates. Prices didn't just rise, they rose by the hour because everyone was racing to spend cash the moment they got it. Nobody wanted to hold a currency that rotted in their hands. The faster they spent, the faster prices climbed. It fed on itself. This is why they paid workers twice a day. Money you earned at noon was garbage by supper. So could this happen to your money? To a modern currency in a stable country? Hold that thought. We'll come back to it because the answer is more uncomfortable than you'd like. By November 1923, the free fall hit its bottom. $1 equaled about 4.2 trillion marks, that number from the very start. Written out, it's a 4 followed by 12 zeros. It's a number so large it stops meaning anything, which is precisely the point. The currency had died. Let's find Clara in the wreckage. Her 40,000 marks, enough to retire on in 1913, could now not buy a single stamp, not a newspaper, not a bread roll. Every mark she'd ever saved, every careful decision erased, not stolen by a thief, not lost in a bad bet, simply evaporated while she did nothing but trust the money in her account. And then, almost as suddenly as it collapsed, it stopped. Here's the strange part. The fix wasn't more gold or foreign rescue or armies. It was something almost psychological. Guess what actually turned it around? It wasn't force. It was a fresh piece of paper that people chose to believe in. On the 15th of November 1923, Germany introduced a brand new currency, the Rentenmark, and the rules around it were strict. The Reichsbank was forced to stop printing endless money to cover government debt. The new currency was tightly limited in supply, and crucially, they set a clean exchange rate. one Rentenmark for 1 trillion of the old dead marks. The new money was said to be backed by German land and industrial assets. Now, honestly, that backing was mostly symbolic. You couldn't actually walk up and swap your Rentenmark for a plot of farmland. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that people believed there was something solid behind it, and that the printing had finally stopped. They set the rate at 4.2 Rentenmarks to the dollar, the same rate Germany had before the war, and prices stabilized almost immediately, almost overnight. This is the proof of everything I've been telling you. The gold in the vault was never really the magic. The magic was belief. Give people a reason to trust the paper again, a limit, an anchor, a promise that's actually kept, and the paper works. Take that trust away, and no amount of ink can save it. But here's the part most people skip. Stability came back. But the damage didn't reverse. There was no undo button for Clara. The new Rentenmark didn't restore her 40,000 marks. Those were gone forever. Stopping the fire doesn't rebuild the house that already burned, and millions of houses had already burned. Now, not everyone lost, and who won versus who lost is the most important lesson in this whole story. Let me show you two neighbors. Picture two men on the same street in 1921, both starting with the same modest wealth. The first, call him Otto, is cautious. He keeps his money as cash in the bank, exactly like Clara. Safe, sensible, responsible. The second, call him Ernst, does something that looks reckless. He takes out a big loan and buys a building with it. He's now deep in debt. By the end of 1923, watch how their fortunes flip. Otto's cash is worthless. His caution destroyed him. Ernst, the borrower, pays off his entire loan with a fistful of near-worthless notes. The debt that once looked crushing now costs him almost nothing to erase. He keeps the building. Inflation quietly transferred wealth from the saver to the borrower, from the cautious to the leveraged. That's the cruel signature of hyperinflation. It punishes the people who followed the rules, the savers, the pensioners, the careful middle class, and it rewards those holding debt and hard assets. It doesn't destroy wealth so much as violently move it from one set of hands to another without anyone voting on it. And the human cost went far beyond money. Millions of ordinary, hardworking Germans watched their security vanish through no fault of their own. That kind of trauma doesn't just disappear. It curdles into anger, into a hunger for someone to blame. Historians widely link that shattered middle class to the weakening of German democracy and to the rise of extremism in the years that followed. It's no coincidence that Hitler's failed coup, the beer hall putsch, happened in Munich on the 8th and 9th of November 1923, at the very peak of the chaos. So let me pull the threads together and answer that question I left hanging. Could this happen to your money? Here's the honest answer. A full 4.2 trillion collapse requires a very specific extreme set of conditions: a lost war, crushing debt, an occupied economy, and a government that chose the printing press. That combination is rare, but the underlying force, money losing value when trust and supply get out of control, is not rare at all. It's always present, just usually slow. So here's what this history actually teaches you in 3 plain pieces. First, money is not wealth. Money is a claim on wealth, and that claim runs entirely on trust. The paper in your wallet is a promise, not a thing. Understanding that changes how you look at every dollar you hold. Second, watch who benefits when money loses value. Governments and heavy borrowers quietly gain when inflation eats away at debt, while savers silently pay the price. When you hear that a little inflation is healthy, ask yourself, healthy for whom? Third, pure cash is not automatically safe. This doesn't mean you shouldn't keep an emergency fund. You absolutely should. But history shows that money sitting still can be quietly bled by inflation, which is exactly why people spread their savings across different kinds of assets. Again, not advice, just the pattern the Weimar story hands you. The Germans in 1923 learned the hardest possible version of this lesson. They learned that cash is only as trustworthy as the people printing it. You get to learn it for free from 100 years away. So here's my question for you, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. If you'd been standing at that factory gate in 1923, watching your wages turn to garbage by the afternoon, would you have been an Otto clinging to cash, or an Ernst borrowing to buy hard assets? And here's the harder one. What does your honest answer say about how you're holding your money right now? Tell me below.